Thank you very much, Goze. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for having us here. And sorry that I don't speak Macedonian. I'm trying since like 4 years, but I'm still not managing to learn it. I'm going to talk about a project that we did the last years that we're now continuing with our SKOPJE team and some other experts in Vienna and Germany, which is the General Hospital in Vienna. I'm going to talk about that, and like funny thing for me, I saw this one posted, what's the next thing after BIM? So that is what I'm going to talk about, DIM, Digital Information Management, and I'll let you know what we did here. So let me start with a rough introduction of the General Hospital. As you can see, this is a big hospital. It is the second biggest hospital in Europe. When you look at the data of this hospital, it's just, everything is huge. Everything is just hundreds of thousands of things, millions of objects, 25,000 rooms, so many things, right? And then they decided some 7 years ago, okay, we need a big refurbishment of this whole faculty. So there is like roughly 2 billion euros going to be invested throughout the next 10 years. And they decided, okay, when we do this, let's take a chance and also refurbish the way we document this building and the way we keep data of this building. So when we arrived, the question was, okay, what can we do to really renew our whole digital way of working? When we arrived, you see the digital stock, so they already had CAD systems, they had a lot, I'm going to talk about that. When we arrived, there were many systems already, digital systems, but the question was, how can we make this a bit more convenient to use and interpret data? So these are the rough project milestones. We started out in 2016 just looking at things, right, finding the strategy, okay, what is all there, what do we have to do when we want to change this? Next step was, okay, what tools can we even use to manage a building like this? Because you're probably aware that BIM is not the only thing that you need when you run a hospital, so there's a lot of systems around it. And then finally we started in 2018 with the implementation, so setting up things, teaching people, things like this, and roughly by the beginning of 2021 we're finished. However, the project continues, so for example our SKOPJE team is about to have a lot to do for the next years to put even more data in, to refine the models that we created in the initial steps. So this is definitely a continuing project, but what you see here is the first steps we did. So I'm going to talk about digital information management and what we mean by this a little bit now, because that is what we, in the end, ended up implementing here. So one thing we have to keep in mind, when this hospital got created, at least the biggest buildings here, that was like, they started construction in the mid-70s of last century, and when they started documenting things, it was about 1980, and we don't have to forget that computers by that time looked like this. So a huge building like this, to put on a computer like that, you can all imagine, it's a pretty hard thing to do. So over the decades, the system grew and grew, so new tools came in. There were many CAD solutions, computer-aided drawings. There even were some first BIM models of the building. They had a document management system. They had a computer-aided facility management system. They had an ERP system, which is for the commercial operation of the building, and many more tools that grew into the system, both on the planning and construction side and on the building operation side. However, as things grew over the decades, it ended up in all disconnected data silos, right? So you had a lot of tools to put data in, but they were really poorly connected, if even connected, and they ended up having like the hospital management not even being able to ask the easiest questions towards the system to get a quick answer, because it took days to answer just one question, like where is this room, or how frequently used is this or that operating room. So that was just how it ended up. So our main mission were two main questions. So how could we achieve a reliable data flow on the input side? So now having this refurbishment project with roughly 2 billion euros being invested in many stakeholders delivering data into a new system. And even more important for the people that own or run the hospital, how can we make data become information? Because data, we have a lot of data already, they had a lot of data the day we started, but they didn't have information from. They couldn't get out of it what they actually were looking for. So Being on a BIM conference, let's take a quick look at the BIM side. That was mainly what we did, my company here, to really make a BIM implementation. So obviously, you're all aware there's a lot of stakeholders involved in the BIM process and during planning and construction. And obviously, all of these disciplines create their models, create their data. And like the first big job was, of course, to connect the data and systems in the planning and construction phase from all these disciplines involved. However, as you all know, BIM data is not everything. So once you start connecting the data in BIM, I mean, that's a big job in itself, but we all know there's a lot of additional data. So there's a lot of calculations, simulations, there's documents around it, there's CAD drawings, there's lists, there's all these things, contracts, and of course, you have these things either way, even though if you're using BIM. So the next thing was, okay, how to put this into one big ecosystem, one managed system, and obviously it was a great help to accept there's CAD data, right? They started in the 80s documenting this, so there was a lot of CAD data, and there still is a lot of CAD data. We needed a document management system, and obviously we needed a well-orchestrated BIM system, and this went into what we call a managed system for a planning and construction site. However, obviously when you operate the building now, there's a lot of new stakeholders coming in, new platforms coming in, new data coming in, and all of those needed to be connected. So this is what we, in the end, ended up calling digital information management. How can we really connect and reorganize processes, technology, tools, and data to really get information in the end? And there's two main things I'm going to talk about today. The first side is the people and the process side, and the other side is the technology side. Now, looking at digital information management and the people aiming to use it, this is a lot about redesigning processes. This is about thinking, a new thinking of roles and functions. Let's start with the organizational part. We heard this already this morning. So obviously, when it comes to producing digital data, there is a lot of new requirements that we have to think about. So there's new documents that we have to produce that tells everybody how to work in a digital way, what to deliver. So these are like the white bubbles, the employer's information requirements, the operator's information requirements, and then to get it down on the project level, the so-called BIM execution plans. And then you have to organize and orchestrate how do information flow from bottom to top, and who is in charge of telling whom what to do and how to do it. And that's the white arrow star. Aside from that, of course, it is a lot about rethinking processes. In the end, in BIM, we do an element-based approach, right? So we have an element like a wall that we all have to think about. In CAD, we just put drawings on each other, and like it was a completely different story to manage the information workflows on a wall in the CAD era than it's now when we worked object-based, because here we have to decide who may and who may not change things here, right? And that is one single wall, but you can imagine when there's like hundreds of thousands of items that we have to think, you really have to think about how does this work exactly, because there's a lot of items in such a model. Now, going on the technology side, of course, there's a lot of things you have to think about when you have a big hospital like this. I'm just going to share some of the main things we talked about. The first thing, always working digital, is you have to set up your standards. You have, of course, to find the right tools to be able to, manage a building this size. You have to set up the tools so they meet your standards and they do what you like them to do. You have to link and connect all of the new tools and the old tools, and with a hospital standing there, it's brownfield, it's already there. We had to think a lot about how do we migrate data from the old system to the new system. So let's talk about standards for a second. We're going to talk about this on podium later on too. The first thing in BIM you have to do when there's no international or national standards enough for your purpose, the first thing you have to think about is, okay, how do we call things, right? So how do we call, like a fire damper like this, How do we call all the attributes? You have to think about this on a very, very detailed way to be able to, describe things in a BIM way. So this is the small I in BIM, the information that you put into the objects. And then you have to think about who is to deliver the information into that object over the planning stages, over the construction phases, and then later on in the operation stage. So that's the first thing. But that's obviously not enough. So with a building this size, we really have to think about geometry levels as well. How much geometry can we afford to be even able to look at this hospital in total in the end, right? So you probably heard of this level of geometry thing. So the level of geometry 100 is just very rough. LOG 500 is just very fine. But yeah, somewhere around 200, maybe a little less, was what we figured out in the end is the suitable level of geometry for us in this project, because we have millions of objects and only regular PCs on the client side to actually look at this building, right? So that was about the standards. Then next, of course, it was about finding the right tools to do this and setting these tools up. We ended up, surprisingly, in Revit as the main system for all of the authoring. So every model and every core data format that people are modeling is now Revit. What we put in is our setup. So Plandata produces setups for companies like big planners and also in this case the hospitals. So the whole setup, the Revit families, the data model, get everything in there. That was one of our main jobs here, to make the standards we worked on before, put it into the system and make Revit reproduce the standards we thought about. So that is what we did in terms of setup. And then, of course, it was about linking and connecting to different tools and platforms. And this is, again, on a very, very detailed level, a way you have to think. So the thing we had to think about is establishing a single source information workflow. So when you have different systems like the BIM on the one side, the computer-aided facility management in the middle, and the cost management, ERP, and enterprise resource planning tool on the right side, we had to think on an attribute level of every object, who is able to change what, where, right? So for example, geometry information can only be changed in BIM, makes sense, right? Then there is additional information coming from the facility management software that might only be put in there, but we are able to link it to the other tools. And next, of course, there's data from the commercial side, like cost and everything, that you could go back into BIM, but you don't have to. But the main idea was single source input, so you only put information in once, and it's defined in which systems you do this. Okay, so last thing I'm going to talk about is the migration part, which was actually for us a really big issue. So talking about roughly 1 million square meters of input CAD data, now transforming it to BIM. So what we had to do, the job was now to not only take the CAD data on the right side, that was the tool they used to use. This is MicroGDS. It's a really old school CAD tool from somewhere in the mid-80s, I think. We had a lot of databases on the left side, so like special databases for them to keep up with all the millions of objects they have. So they had their own, the MicroGDS had its own, EDS is a special thing they use themselves, they build up themselves over decades, and many, many other sources of data. And now the big job was to get all the CAD data into the BIM system and all the other information into the CAFM system, the facility management system, and ideally connect these while we're doing it. And as you can imagine, that was a big job, and when we talk about roughly 1 million square meters, nobody wants to sit there and model this by hand, right? This is not possible. So we had to find ways, and this is where you see this little icon here, this Python icon. We had to find ways to really automate this as good as possible in order to have this, in a sufficient time and cost frame. So we had to really develop interfaces, data interfaces ourselves from this old school system, then find the data with some Python scripts and then put it into Revit in a magic way. So that is what was for us the core project in terms of data migration. And this is what it ended up looking in the end. So what you can see here is a floor plan as it came from the old CAD system. So this is like one floor plan of one of those two big towers. However, I'm afraid you cannot really see what's happening in the green box, but I'll let you know. So the main thing is that these are Revit objects now. It looks like 2D CAD, but it is Revit already. What you see here now is the 3D side of it. You can see it's just box geometry. There's no 3D geometry whatsoever, but everything, that all the data that were there in the old databases and all these things are already inside the object. So that allowed us to connect it to the CAFM system and so on and so on. So what you can see here is this is a BIM model, even though it looks like CAD, and the BIM is not really beautiful or anything, but the information is inside, everything is aligned, everything is just the way it was, but now they can already profit from 3D located objects. So you have rooms, you have objects like this, so for main part of the operation stage, this is fair enough to really run the building in an efficient way. Okay, so that was about the data migration, and let me sum up with some insights again. In the end, this whole digital information management is about connecting data and people, and it finally allows the management of the hospital by now to ask questions to a system, right, and to be informed in a short way. So there is a lot of systems down there on the data lake side. There is a lot of data, but to be able to extract information from these data, this is what we had to achieve. This is what digital information management is about. So no matter who you are, if you're a doctor, for example, and you want to know where there's like an available room for you for operating, for surgery, this system will, take data from different platforms and suck it out there and put it onto your smartphone just like that. You could be, for example, a patient going there and asking yourself where to go to the X-ray, where's cardiology. So that is something, indoor navigation, which is quite an easy, understandable benefit that everybody going into a big hospital like this is profiting from. And of course, when you're the guy maintaining the building, fixing things, you might want to know if there's like the device you're standing in front of, is it still under guarantee? Do I have to maintain it or do I have to renew it? Again, there's data from different systems coming together on your tablet telling you, okay, please replace or please fix it. Obviously, the locationing, so where is this broken fire damper, is something that is really helpful for people out in the field as well. And finally, of course, the management side, you can just what tools do serve my purposes. You need to rethink your organization. You need to think about processes, roles, everything. You need a migration strategy. As long as there is a building already, you definitely need one. And of course, a transformation strategy next to it, so telling the right people what to learn and what to do in the right stage. So, thank you very much for your attention. I hope I stayed halfway in time. If you're interested in the lecture or want to know anything else, you can scan the barcode. That's not there anymore. Anyway, thank you very much.